about that there are other families who've been to Boston Children's and have similar stories, that this is not their first creepy rodeo. And one of the people that I learned about while working on the story is attorney Beth Maloney, who has a story of her own, and she has graciously agreed to join us here on the show. Beth, thank you for joining us here on the New England Talk Network.
Well, thank you for having me.
What was your first reaction when you heard about the Pelletier story?
I wasn't the least bit surprised.
Why not?
Because I had represented two families prior to the Pelletiers in virtually the exact same circumstances.
I know that there's all sorts of privilege and HIPAA, et cetera, here, but can you give us any broad outlines?
Yes. In both situations where I represented the parents, the child had a prior diagnosis from different medical providers. In this case, it was not mitochondrial disease. It was an autoimmune disorder. The first child was brought into the emergency room. The physicians at Children's immediately said that it was all psychiatric and told the parents that unless they voluntarily signed the child into the hospital psych ward, that they would take custody away from the parents.
Wow.
So when the parents reached me, the child was already in the psych ward, and I was able to get her out. The second family, what happened, same thing. A young lady goes into the emergency room. They're seeking help. Prior diagnosis. Children's disagrees with the diagnosis, cuts off the existing medication. Mm-hmm. In that case, immediately or virtually immediately notified the state. By the time I got the phone call, the question was, could I be in court to represent the family the next morning? The Pelletier case, I was actually consulted on by the family and by the family's attorney at the beginning of the case.
Right.
So I'm well aware of exactly what happened, where the family was marched out by guards. Every single bit of that is true.
But that seems so strange for a hospital, for a children's hospital, and for a well-regarded children's hospital. We're talking, by the way, to attorney Beth Maloney. What's going on?
I truly don't know, because certainly there is a need for beds for children in psychiatric hospitals. So why that hospital would feel the need to keep a bed full, it is certainly less work for them if the child is in state custody, because they don't have to go through the usual procedures to have stays approved by a private insurance company. Mm-hmm. I doubt very much that any private insurance company would have approved keeping Justina Pelletier locked up in the hospital for 11 months. But when the child is in custody, the approval is given by the case worker, the social worker for the department, and the state pays the bill.
So it goes from involved parents and involved insurance companies who have either family love as a motive or fiscal and health responsibility in the case of insurance companies, to a government worker and taxpayer dollars.
Right.
By the way, you are familiar, I assume, at least anecdotally, with the problems we're having with our Department of Children and Families right now in Massachusetts, where we have an ongoing scandal. There's a 1 in 10 chance that when Justina Pelletier is dropped off at a foster family's house, which is the new ruling, there's a 1 in 10 chance that one of the people in the house will have a criminal record. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out how in the world any sane person, a judge or whatever, thinks that having my daughter living with total strangers while she's sick is better than having my daughter come home with me.
Well, I think what has probably happened in this case is certainly, and I don't have inside information about this, but looking at this as an attorney, being familiar with child protection law, having been through this for two other families and following this case, I believe what happened is that there was a point in time, finally, and by the way, I do want to mention I am the person who pitched the story to the Boston Globe because I was so appalled that this was happening to yet another family. And so when that publicity came out, there was a point in time where the court wanted, I believe, Tufts to resume medical care for the child. And when I read that, I even posted on my Facebook pages, I would think Tufts would be somewhat reluctant to jump back in because she was a patient at Tufts.
Right.
And then their medical care is eliminated. Obviously, her condition went downhill. Now to expect Tufts to come back into a very high-profile case and clean up the mess the children created, I just felt there might be some reluctance there. I think that's what happened. So now the child was moved to a residential facility. They can't really get the kind of medical care that they want, keeping her in custody. So now their solution is to move her somewhere else and have the UMass take over medical care. Maybe UMass more or less has to do it because they are a state, University of Massachusetts is a state institution, so perhaps that's part of what's going on behind the scenes. But why this child would have been removed from the care of her parents, we have the right to arrange medical care for our children. This was a disagreement by the Boston Children's Hospital physicians with the Tufts physicians, and because these parents would not say, okay, children, we'll do whatever you want, children said the state step in and take custody. That's what happened.
We're talking to Attorney Beth Maloney. What happened to the health of the two previous children whose families you helped when their treatment was ended?
They then finally began to recover and do better. But both of them were severely impacted. The first child, luckily, was only there for about 6 weeks. The other young lady.
But my question is, during that 6 weeks, though.
There was no improvement at all.
No improvement. Okay.
No. In fact, the first child began banging her head against the wall. They had put her in a football helmet, and she would be banging her head against the wall. And I actually heard a nurse say that the best thing to do was to just let her tire herself out.
Wow.
I really couldn't believe that I heard that in the year 2012, that we should just allow the child to keep banging her head against the wall until she got tired, rather than run blood tests to look for the infection that she was diagnosed with before she even went into that hospital.
And the second case that you had, you said that as soon as the treatment ended, the patient went way down?
As soon as, absolutely. It was a similar situation in that the child, when she went into the hospital, was, for example, painting artwork, and she then became unable to do anything at all.
We're talking,
what they do is they then put them on psych drugs, and they refuse to address the underlying condition because they are committed to the position that it's all psychiatric.
You know, the part one of the many parts I keep stopping at is these are Tufts doctors. They prescribe actual surgery in the case of Justina Pelletier. And the insurance company said, yeah, we are going to install this tube in her, colon area and kind of extreme treatment, which sounds awful to me. So this is all real.
Yes.
Why in the world would the state step in and say, we're so certain that one side is right and the other side is wrong that we're going to strip parents of their rights?
Because they do whatever Boston Children's Hospital wants them to do. I saw it in action.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I do not know. All I know is that I'm reading in the Globe about children that are missing and presumed dead. And at the same time, I'm reading about hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent by the taxpayers, not just on the medical care for Justina, but what do you think it costs to have social workers, attorneys, court systems, judges, trials? All of that is being paid for by the taxpayers to address a situation of a child who's already being treated at Tufts, but we're not going to take a look at highly neglected and abused children, and in fact, they're presumed dead. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I don't understand why the Attorney General of Massachusetts is not investigating the situation.
Oh, really? I can answer. Finally, one I can answer, Beth. The reason is because Boston Children's is a large, powerful, wealthy institution with lots of powerful political friends. And in this one-party state where there's only one political party, she's part of the team. She's running for governor, and she doesn't want to upset these big-dollar donors to Boston Children's or to the political friends around it. It's the same reason why she's never brought a major public corruption case, even though we've had a sitting Speaker of the House and numerous legislators go to jail or get thrown out of office, and she never brought a single case because she's on the team. So she's not going to confront this powerful institution. So.
Well, I think I would think that Children's Hospital, I may be wrong, but they must at this point be rethinking. They never anticipated that this would ever end up in the Globe, that I'd ever be on a radio show with you, that it's been covered in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, ABC News. I'm certain they thought they were just going to keep going along, taking children away from their parents, and everybody was going to be really quiet about it.
Right.
And the only thing I think that would make a difference to that hospital is their pocketbook. So hopefully people have stopped taking their children there.
Well, I've heard from many parents in the last week or so who've said, if my child's sick, we're not going to Boston Children's. And I've heard a particularly disturbing message from a woman who has a child with mitochondrial disease. And she says, I'm terrified. He has an appointment and he's supposed to go. What if they disagree? The idea that you walk into that risk is just it's beyond belief. Beth Maloney, thank you so much for the work you've been doing. Thank you for watching this case.